Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast where we ask the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and today we're asking, are we buying less because we care more? Hello and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Green Room. As ever, all of our episodes are on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room podcasts. And today we're talking about conscious consumerism, which I think is different to unconscious consumerism, which is perhaps shopping while sleepwalking or maybe getting a late night kebab, perhaps, I'm not sure. But as ever, I'm joined by a fantastic co-host.
Yes.
Lizzie Elston, how are you?
I'm just fantastic. I'm pumped. It's good to be back after the festive break. So yeah, really looking forward to this conversation today. And you know, we're all consumers, right? It's what we all do.
That's right, yeah. And I think we're increasingly conscious of our purchasing decisions. And I think today we're going to talk about all sorts of things from fast fashion to perhaps changes to how we travel around and everything we consume really. So I think it'll be hopefully an interesting conversation. How's your consumption habits, Lizzie? Are you conscious in some of your ethical
I try and stay conscious throughout. Yep. Oh no, absolutely. You can't help but sort of think a bit more now about what you're buying and make some decisions and decide, are you going to buy that sort of box of vegetables which is actually wrapped up in extra layers of plastic? Probably not. So yeah, at many levels, I am certainly thinking about it more.
That's very good. And hopefully a few of our listeners will change their habits as well after today. But who have we got in the studio to guide us through this week's question, Lizzie?
So we have some great guests. We've got Ben Perkins. Ben is our head of consumer business research. He works with some of the UK's largest consumer brands to help them understand changing consumer needs. Hi, Ben.
Hello.
And we've got Philli Boyle. Philli co-founded the Help Refugees movement and helped to launch the Choose Love pop-up shop, the world's first store where you can buy real gifts for refugees. Welcome, Philli.
Thank you.
Is it icebreaker time?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's been so long. So excited. Here we go. And this is it, guys. If you could bring back any fashion trend, what would it be?
Oh, side ponytail.
Oh.
I used to love a side pony.
Like you're thinking.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of up there with crimped hair, isn't it? It's that same sort of...
Yeah, same kind of time. I think you can pull it off. It looks a bit cooler. I think crimped hair, you couldn't bring it back because it did just objectively look terrible.
How about you, Ben?
Easy one. Shell suit all the way.
Yes.
Absolutely
nice.
Practical, functional, comfortable.
Very flammable.
Very flammable.
It's kind of surprising it ever went out of fashion, really, isn't it?
Well, I think in some places it hasn't. My household being one of them. So.
I think there's a real market for, kind of Tudor style frilly shirts. I think, we need that kind of Austin Powers look, really. The big frilly collars, big frilly shirts. I think, it's a great way of mopping up your lunch if you spill some soup down or something. But, I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I think you might be alone in that one there. And I would bring back leg warmers just because I used to collect them when I was younger and I had them in every possible colour in the rainbow. And I don't know why they ever went out of fashion, but that's what I would start wearing again.
A leg warmer collector, that is,
yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, something you didn't know about me.
Oh. So Ben, if I can come to you first and perhaps you can give us some guidance around what we're calling conscious consumption or mindful shopping or ethical spending. It's all parts of everything that we purchase, really, and how consumer behaviour is changing on that. And it's clear that consumers are thinking more about their purchases. But are we actually buying less, or are we just spending differently?
So I think, George, there's it's a bit of both, really. So I think that we are seeing, if you look at the market data, if you listen to what our clients, the big retailers, are saying, then definitely we're seeing a sort of downward trend in volume sales, right? So that is showing that people are actually buying less stuff. So I think there's definitely some evidence in the market in terms of that through that. That's why I like the term conscious consumerism, because it shows what's important to me is that consumers are thinking a bit more. They're more aware about what the impact that their purchasing and their consumption is having on both the planet, but also on society as well, with all of the ethical issues that come from some of the methods of of manufacturer, etc. So there's definitely this sort of trend towards buying less stuff and consuming less. And that applies to clothing, it applies to food, it applies to all areas of the market, really. But I think there's also people are starting to sort of spend their money in different ways. So we as consumers are becoming much more interested in buying things secondhand, either for ourselves or as gifts, or at Christmas. We saw an increase in the number of people who bought secondhand gifts, toys, clothing, etc. So I think that taps into some sort of ideas around things that are unique and a bit different and very much anathema to the sort of the cookie cutter high street type brands. So I think there's a bit of a change in behaviour, and there's also a reduction.
And Cheese Love has an interesting sort of pop-up store concept as well, doesn't it? It'd be quite interesting to understand a bit more about that, and also then, Ben, to get your views on, you know, the experience that you still get from going into a store versus perhaps online shopping, and what's the pop-up concept?
So the concept, like the T-shirts, the concept very much came about because it was going to be winter time 3 years ago, and we knew we were going to need to raise a lot of extra funds to cover the extra needs of winter. So we're now funding 122 projects in 15 countries, grassroots projects. At that time when we started, it was 70. When we first did the Choose Love shop. And we knew that every single one of those groups was going to need more of something over the winter, whether it's just blankets, but more likely blankets and kids' shoes, and definitely more nutritious food, medical care. The needs for everything go up over the winter. And, you know, we'd only been existed a year and a half. We didn't have, we didn't have lots of avenues to raise £1 million, which is what we needed to do to meet those extra needs. And so the shop basically served the purpose of allowing us to buy all the items. The concept is basically it's sort of, the store is decked out like the original concept was like an Apple store kind of feel, kind of minimal, quite sort of, beautiful, simple space. On the table, laid out beautifully, kind of merchandise in front of you are a series of items. And it's not often until you go in that you see that, oh, those items are, a pack of nappies, like a selection of food, a sleeping bag, a tent. The concept is that you come in and you browse these items, you read information about them, you read information on the walls about the context of those items and where they're going, and you pick, and you can pick something that costs £5, or you can buy the whole store for £500. And our commitment, because we have the costs of the store sponsored, is that every single penny you spend on whatever items you choose will go to that item or something similar for someone who needs it. So for us, that allowed us to meet those extra needs, and for consumers, for shoppers, it allowed them to get the kind of buzz that you get from shopping, and the warm fuzzy feeling that you get from doing something nice for someone else, and also the agency of like the choice, I think, of what you're going to pick. So it's not that it's just you have to get a goat for £10, or it's you really have the ability to choose. So you can really personalize it.
Wonderful.
So Ben, from your perspective, is that having a kind of physical presence, in this age of online shopping, presumably that's quite important for conscious consumers? It
is. It's still really, really important. So I think headline message, stores are here to stay. Stores are here to stay because consumers, as much as they love online, they love the convenience that online offers. Shopping is essentially, it's always been a social experience, right? So it's a way that people can interact with other consumers, with the people in store, just be amongst other people. So that is very important to people. What's really interesting is that with the sort of growth of social media and modern technology, that we're seeing some of that social activity is happening online. So for some people, for some consumers, that social shopping experience is enabled by viewing a live stream from one of the big platforms of somebody promoting and sharing and doing that. But for many, it's still that walking down to the local high street and talking to your butcher, your baker, your grocer, or whatever it is. So stores are really important for society, and they're really important for retail. And what I think is really cool about the Choose Love model, Bill, is that it's absolutely on trend with so many of the big drivers of retail. So there's customization and personalization in terms of the things that consumers can choose to donate and why they want to donate it, and the message, well, it aligns with what's important to them, their purposes, their values, etc. But it's also a really cool experience. And it's an experience that means so much more when people are together and doing it than if it was purely online. So, I mean, we saw the photos of the store at Christmas with the queues outside. So people were queuing up in order to go in and buy a donation for somebody else. And it's fascinating, but it taps into that whole idea that people want experiences, and some of those experiences they want in a physical environment. And shopping, as always, has been about making yourself feel good. And there are many ways that you can make yourself feel good. And this is just a really great way of doing it.
And the content that we get the best engagement from each year in, year out, is the queue photo, is the content showing people interacting in the store. But the queue especially, people just absolutely love it. That's the thing.
I thought you were going to say people just love a queue.
People just love the fact that people are queuing. It just makes them feel so nice.
Yeah.
And then also, like Ben was saying, we it's also the design inside the store. You know, we created Instagram moments, like multiple different Instagram moments within the store. You know, and that's possible to do even for us as a charity who have to remain really sensitive to the fact we don't want to kind of make too light of the situation. It's obviously a serious kind of sphere that we're working within, but at the same time, we think that you can still feel great and embrace feeling great about doing something nice for someone else.
I think that's a really interesting point because there is the movement is driven almost by that Instagram, that what hashtags are being used and who's sharing it, who's influencing it. We might get onto some of that later, but I think it's is that also a sign of the reason why this conscious consumerism sort of phenomenon has appeared over the last few years? Is that partly a generational thing? Is this millennials or Gen Z people coming in and actually wanting to take ownership of their purchasing decisions?
I think they ask a lot of questions. I think even I've been like on the door, and when we've done club nights and I've been on the door, and so you've got people coming in who are like 20, 21.
This sounds like a very cool shop, I have to say.
No, this is at nightclubs. This is not at the shop. We do some parties at the shop, but on the door, and you've got like 19, 20, 21-year-olds asking how much of the money from this ticket, they've spent £7 on their ticket to this club night, how much of this money goes to the charity. There's the people, young people are asking questions that they want to know, oh, this charity, what's their overheads, what's the call cost, what happens with this money, where do they work? The transparency side is, I think, Ben, I don't know if you'll agree from the retail perspective generally, but is something that we have found is how we've connected with especially younger audiences, I think.
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely right. So if you look at the data, or certainly the data that we've got, you'll see that there's been an increase in interest and engagement with a variety of issues across the generations. Okay, so kind of it's trending up from pre-boomers through to Gen Z, the youngest sort of cohort at the moment. But what we are seeing, and I think this is exactly in line with what Philli was saying, is that for those millennials and for Gen Z, it's really increasingly about authenticity. So if you are a brand and you are launching and you are making a big play around ethical standards in manufacturing, sustainability, recycling of products, you better make sure that that is watertight and that is consistent across the business. And it's not just an example of greenwashing, because consumers increasingly will see straight through that, and it can lead to more negativity and sort of negative headlines than positive ones. So I think that the younger consumer, I don't like to generalize about them too much because it's a generation of individuals after all. It's really about authenticity. That's one of the strong messages that comes through.
And just for the purpose of our listeners, greenwashing is?
Well, that's the sort of theory that people are paying lip service to some of these ideals in order to to benefit from the associated positivity to that. So kind of somebody who's eliminated all plastic bottles but still has plastic cups and plastic cutlery and sends loads of stuff to landfill and doesn't pay its workers the minimum wage, etc., etc. So tokenism in a sort of sustainability sense.
It's such an interesting point, isn't it? Because, I mean, I saw on the UN website that 93% of the world's 250 largest companies are now reporting on sustainability. So clearly, there's the real onus is on organisations to be reporting. And perhaps those top 250 really are, more aligned with the requirements. But I guess your point is that all organisations need to be seen to be, doing the right thing.
Absolutely. So today we're really talking about consumers, and consumers are a big driver of everything that's happening around this. But then there are also two other sort of bodies or groups that are driving this change within the market. The first one being the regulators, the governments, etc., which are implementing regimes and regulations that are going to require more effort on businesses to be more ethical, more sustainable, reduce their impact on the climate, etc. And then the most fascinating one for me is investors. So you've got everyone from the big investment groups and investment funds saying, actually, we're not going to invest in businesses that don't meet a certain hurdle in terms of their standards and the way that they operate. So kind of that's cutting off the supply. And then there's others that are offering preferential rates to businesses that do. So kind of there's incentives from investors and disincentives, there's regulations in place. And then there's this consumer who's rapidly evolving and saying, look, if you don't align with my values, or I'm going to shop with brands that do align with my values, is probably a better way of putting it.
So we've talked a lot quite broadly about consumer behaviour. What about us? What about us in this room today? What are we all doing, to make ethical choices, to be more sustainable? What are some good examples? If any of you want to share something that you're doing differently now?
I've actually recently started to get the vegetable box deliveries each week, which don't have any plastic in, and it's local as can be in central London, and organic produce. It's actually not more expensive than when you go to the supermarket either.
We've done that too, and it's good. But it does make you think about, hang on, I've got a massive turnip now. What do I do with that? So
it's good. You get creative, and it's good to eat seasonal. It does make sense.
And are you using it all? You're not letting it sort of go to waste? That's the other thing, isn't it?
Then it's quite a nice like challenge. Like look up, it's so easy with the internet. Look up recipes with leeks. I had to do that this morning. I don't know what I can make with a leek, but I did, and it was lovely. I roasted them.
Soup. Oh yes, roast them. Very good.
How about you, Ben?
So I'm sticking with my marginal gains theory of sort of more conscious consumption. So my local supermarket at the end of my street uses the compostable bags. So I'm making sure that I'm using those to put my food waste back into. So eliminating the plastic bags. I'm clutching, which the listeners can't hear, my brand new Christmas present, which was an aluminium water bottle, which helps me cut back on plastic bottles. We used to consume a huge amount of those at home, but now we've all switched to those.
The problem that I have with those is that I lose one per month.
Exactly.
So I don't know how much more sustainable it is in the long term.
Buying 10 plastic bottles, isn't it?
Okay, I hope so.
I suppose. In terms of the behaviours that we touched on earlier, and Ben, you were talking about ethical organisations, ethical products. Is there a question here around equality of consumers? Because perhaps not everyone can afford to buy ethical products, which are typically more expensive. What's the sort of trend you're seeing there?
So it's a really good point, because for many consumers across the country, across the world, affordability, price, the value equation is the most important thing in terms of making their choices. They would love to be more supportive of some of these issues and values, but their sort of primary driver is price. So we have to acknowledge that. Now, I think what's really interesting for brands and retailers in particular is to think about, right, so those consumers demand a certain value at a certain price. What happens when they want a certain value and a certain level of ethical, conscious, sustainable credentials within that brand at that same price? And that is going to be the real challenge to business. And I think a great area where you can sort of see this starting to happen already is fast fashion. So many people just say fast fashion just cannot be sustainable. Essentially, it is anti-sustainability in the sense that it's about frequent purchasing of relatively low cost and disposable items. Well, it's good to see that there are brands who are trying to embrace the challenge of how do we deliver sustainable, fast-moving fashion in a model that is more sustainable. So acknowledging the fact that consumers like it, but acknowledging the fact that consumers also want to make more ethical and more sustainable choices. And I think a really interesting area around this is to look at the sort of growth of what we sort of use the term for of re-commerce. So re-commerce is consumers reselling items, and more specifically, brands and retailers enabling that. So whether it's a platform like Depop, or whether it's some of the trials that are running at various stores up and down the country in terms of they're buying back clothing from consumers, and then they're either, depending on the state of it, it's being recycled or it's being resold. Now, recent data that's come out of the US suggests that this market is already about to overtake fast fashion. So kind of the growth is such that it's already at that point there. So kind of, I think that the affordability issue is one that we shouldn't ignore. But I think that rapidly we will see that even the retailers who are serving that market will have to adapt.
And presumably that's going to be hard because, organisations like Choose Love was sort of set up from the start to do good. Traditional retailers or supermarkets, for example, weren't. So how difficult is it going to be for them to change their models? And if people aren't spending money in their stores, then how are they going to afford to invest in these new sorts of models?
Yeah, so it's a real challenge. So the business is built upon volume. It's built upon selling more and more to consumers. So I think that's where this whole idea of resale, and also at the same time, we've got the growth of rental. These offer retailers opportunities to think about the revenue in a different way. So rather than sell 10 dresses, what about if you sell the same dress 10 times?
Yeah.
And so you're extending the life of the product, which is great for the environment. You are offering consumers more value, well, as it works through the cycle, and so on and so forth. So I think that is a really interesting model that's starting to feed through, but it's really hard.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I'd want to wear the same, same
dress 10 times.
Yeah, or certainly not, maybe not the same dress, but the same anything which 10 other people have worn. So
there's an example that I've come across: a clothing brand, Ascot. They show the traceability of their items on their website and actively encourage people not to buy more clothes, saying that their definition of progress is to reduce people's wardrobes, which is pretty odd for a clothing company. And then another one is a jeans company called Height and Height Denim. They take that further still and actively encourage customers, prepare yourselves, not to wash their jeans for 6 months, as this has the biggest impact on the environment. And apparently they've even got a club for those who manage not to wash their jeans.
Yeah, we work with, there's a company called Rapa Nui, and they make organic cotton T-shirts on the Isle of Wight. And they have a scheme whereby there's a barcode in every T-shirt inside it. And once you've worn the T-shirt out, you send it back to them. And then they make it it's like a circular system where then they use it to make another T-shirt. And then you get £5 off the next T-shirt you buy from them.
All right, okay.
So that's quite a nice system, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's lots and lots of innovation that's happening around this in terms of different models. But I think back to your point, Lizzie, it's interesting as to a lot of those models are sort of their value-add services to sort of core customers, or else they're sort of niche brands targeting consumers that maybe have a bit more money in their pockets and are able to pay for it. So I think the challenge is going to be, how can you scale these models and how can you deliver it to more and more consumers? And I don't think that there's a solution to that problem yet.
And in the time frame for that, are we talking years
tomorrow,
or decades? Because I think there are lots. We're not just talking about fashion here. We're talking. We've done an episode previously on a plastic-free supermarket called the Clean Kilo in Birmingham, which it's a similar kind of concept of people wanting to purchase groceries which don't have all the packaging and all the rest of it. In my household, we've recently started using eco-friendly loo paper, I think called Who Gives a Crap, I think it's called. But
nice.
it looks very pretty in the bathroom. It's all nicely wrapped and very colourful and things like that. But so I think there is across all walks of consumption, there are different ways of tackling this, but in terms of that time frame question, are we when are we going to achieve a net positive on all this?
I think that's, if we're totally honest around this, right, it's really hard to say. There's lots of targets that are being bandied around to do with 2050. We've seen the sort of the deadline brought forward for not selling any more diesel, petrol or hybrid cars. But these are important lines in the sand, but they're going to be extremely hard to reach. But I think that it's easy to get sort of a little bit myopic around these targets and deadlines. And what I think is really important not to forget is that, well, if you look at the totality of the problem, it can be daunting and completely mind-blowing. But just because you can't be perfect doesn't mean you shouldn't try and do what you can to change your behaviour, your family's behaviour, George, your business's behaviour, your consumers' behaviour, etc. There is no reason why you look at the enormity of the task ahead and think, we can't do it, so therefore do nothing. And that's one of the really encouraging things for me, is that more and more businesses are trying to do more and more.
That it's a very interesting point you raised there, actually, Ben, because just, again, having done a bit of prep for the podcast, having come across an article which actually said, it's almost futile, individuals making these small changes. It might make them feel better about themselves in the short term, but at the end of the day, our market is set up in a capitalist way and businesses are set up in that way. So at the end of the day, making these small changes, is it really going to make a difference? But I think what you've just said, and I agree with, is there's an option to do nothing, or there's an option to do something, and surely doing something has got to be better.
Well, absolutely. And, I think that one of the sort of the phrases we're using within our sort of our retail view for this year, is about, the year of the activist. We saw that in 2019 when a lone voice of a teenager has sort of impacted the agenda at the World Economic Forum in Davos. So I think if Greta stands for anything, well, then it's the fact that one voice, one person's behaviour and decisions can make a difference. So it's getting all very sort of emotional now.
So obviously we've talked a lot about retail and fast fashion. Clearly, consumerism relates to all sectors of consumer. So, this presumably people are also conscious of which gym they're choosing to go to, or where they're choosing to go on holiday and which sort of agency they would use, or where they might stay in a hotel and which hotel it is, or buying their next car. It's broad, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. So I think right across the sort of consumer landscape, but increasingly beyond that as well, right? In terms of into other areas of consumer spending. So whether it's consumers considering, we've seen not just sales of electric vehicles increasing, but even faster than that, consideration, the number of people that are looking or thinking about that for their next purchase. We've seen that the big kind of hotel chains are looking at how they can eliminate plastics from their hotel rooms, etc. It's because consumers are demanding that. They don't want to live a life that is plastic free and then go and use single-use plastics when they're on holiday. That's something that irks them and annoys them. And also in terms of the sort of people are much more conscious in terms of their travel plans and the impact that is having. Now, as yet, they're passing that challenge back to many of those transport providers in terms of, so what are you going to do about it to make it easier for us to still go on holiday, but be able to offset it, or you offset it for us, or whatever else. So I think that gets into quite a nice sort of area around how consumers are more and more looking at brands that they shop with across the consumer spectrum to be ethical, sustainable on their behalf.
Yep.
There you go. That's a positive call to action for our listeners who are all consumers themselves. And I think as spring is on the horizon, so there's no excuse not to go out to your local high street and have a wander around. So,
absolutely.
Philli and Ben, thank you so much for coming in today and chatting to us. Philli, I'm very much looking forward to popping into the Choose Love store in Soho, if I can queue up for long enough. And
You'll have to wait until this November. We open last week of November, so you'll have to.
Okay. Oh, great.
You can shop online before then.
Oh, brilliant! Well, that suits my cusp of millennial tropes there. So that's great. I mean, what's next for Choose Love?
What's next? Well, people can shop on the online store, choose.love, all year round. That really sustains us and the projects that we're supporting throughout the year. We do an ongoing collaboration with Print Club London, so people can get beautiful Choose Love themed prints by lots of incredible artists on the Print Club London website. We're always talking about what's going on social media. We're at Choose Love on Instagram, and lots of updates and topics that aren't really covered so much in the media. So there's always lots of actions that people can do. You can come and volunteer. There's letters you can write to your MP. Loads of ways you can get involved. Yeah, just keep up with what we're doing. And if Of course, we rely on public donations really, really heavily. So if anyone would like to give, wants to get involved in any other way, then just stay in touch, and please, you're most welcome to donate. It would be hugely appreciated.
No worries. And all of the relevant information will be on the show notes with the social media handles and website and links and links to buy t-shirts so you can look like Hollywood A-listers any time and spread the love.
And take more than a t-shirt to do that for me, George.
Well, Ben and Philli, thank you so much for coming down today to chat to us about this. You can find all of our episodes on our webpage, which is Deloitte.co.uk/Greenroom Podcasts. And yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do get in touch. And Philli, Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.